Well, now, continuing on the subject of bad movies, here's Spot the Wonder Dog, the cinematic canine who can spot a bad flick easier than he can find a fire hydrant. Yeah, it's time for Dog of the Week, where Roger and I each pick the week's worst movies.
Okay, Gene, my dog this week is a reprehensible attempt at quickie exploitation called Guyana, Cult of the Damned.
Ugh.
It's advertised as the true story of the mass suicide of the Reverend Jim Jones cult followers at Jonestown, Guyana last year. And if there's any reason at all to see a movie about such a sad and tragic event, it might be to try to understand why it could happen. But this movie doesn't contain a clue as to why all those people took poison and died. And Reverend Jim Jones is portrayed merely as a crazy preacher who wears sunglasses all the time.
This hand, God's hand, is my hand. And it will guide you. And you will be freed and shall be delivered into paradise.
Some paradise. We get no sense of the charisma that the real Jim Jones must have had. The movie lingers in gruesome detail on scenes of torture, perversion, cruelty, and finally the mass suicide. This is a despicable movie.
And when they took out the electrodes to put them on the little boy, that's about when I walked out of the theater. My Dog is yet another film from our old buddies out in Salt Lake City, Sun Classic Pictures. This time it's the Bermuda Triangle from the same fast buck operators who brought us In Search of Noah's Ark and the Lincoln Conspiracy. These films never prove a thing, and the Bermuda Triangle is no exception. Exactly what is snaring all those ships and airplanes in the Atlantic Ocean that has a variety of sailors looking skyward with amazement in their eyes? This film never says what exactly. It could be magnetic waves, a sea monster, an undertow, a laser beam from the lost city of Atlantis. Heck, I suppose it could be somebody on Noah's Ark. These Sun Classic Pictures are just junk sold with high-pressure TV ads. You know, we all ought to be wise to Sun Classic's game by now.
And speaking for both Gene and myself, we'd like to thank Sun Classic for providing about half of the dogs of the week on this program. Hold on a moment, Gene. It's Spot the Wonder Dog leaping into the balcony to announce the week's worst movies, the Dogs of the Week.
I thought it was Spot. My Dog of the Week is yet another karate film, A Force of One, which wants to be an anti-drug adventure story, but it serves up that same old chop sake. It's the story of a California police department that hires a karate expert to train its officers in karate so they can stop a murderer who they think may be a karate expert. I wonder if they'd hire Arthur Murray if they thought the killer knew how to dance. Why don't they just shoot the guy and be done with it? Now, there's an anti-drug message every 20 minutes, but every 10 minutes there's a fight. Fights are what this film is really about. A Force of One is packed full of those familiar punches to the face and kicks to the groin. That whole anti-drug theme is just an excuse for the punch-out movie.
Sounds pretty bad. You know, Gene, I'm almost suspicious that Spot the Wonder Dog has picked my Dog of the Week this week out of professional jealousy. It's a kiddie matinee movie named The Magic of Lassie. And what's the matter, Spot? Do you sometimes wish you could be a big, brave collie dog and rescue tiny kittens from burning buildings, huh? Well, Lassie does all that and more in this pale and predictable imitation of the original Lassie pictures. The Magic of Lassie stars Jimmy Stewart as a kindly grandfather who gets a kiss from Lassie every morning. But then his grandchildren learn that their beloved adopted collie is legally the property of the mean old man who lives next door. Well, when the mean old man takes Lassie back home with him, well, Lassie runs away. And then James Stewart's young grandson runs away to look for Lassie. And then James Stewart runs away to look for his grandson and Lassie. And then the police start looking for all three of them. But then Lassie saves the kitten from the burning building. And then, well, sorry, Spot, but not even you could save this picture.
Well, here's somebody I do care about, Spot the Wonder Dog, reminding us it's time for Dog of the Week, where we each pick the week's worst movie. What rotten flick have you seen lately?
Okay, Gene. My dog this week is Midnight Madness, a real disappointment from the Disney organization, which isn't even putting the Walt Disney name on this picture because of some fairly mild PG-rated jokes. The movie's about an all-night scavenger hunt, and I guess Midnight Madness is supposed to be a PG-rated version of Animal House, but the plot is a mess. The characters race aimlessly around Los Angeles, and the slapstick gags aren't funny either, not even a character falling blissfully into a vat of beer. Another strange thing is how nasty this movie is towards some of its characters. It fills the screen with odd-looking people and then makes fun of the way they look, and that leaves us feeling kind of shabby. Movies should leave us feeling a lot better than Midnight Madness does, and for that matter, they should be a lot funnier, too.
That makes a lot of sense. My Dog this week is a sequel you probably haven't been waiting for. It's The Wilderness Family Part 2, the continuing story of a family in the wilderness that suffers one natural disaster after another but always pulls through. Darn it. Everything in the film is phony. One overwrought action scene after another. For example, the family is trapped in their log cabin. The mother has pneumonia, and the family's pet raccoon knocks over a kerosene lamp, setting the house on fire while a pack of wolves run wild outside the house, eager to devour the family dog. At the same time, the father, out hunting for a doctor for his wife, is hit square in the forehead by 10 cubic tons of snow. Yes, an avalanche, and he survives. It's just laughable. The Wilderness Family Part 2 is designed not to encourage a love of nature, but instead a fear of it.
Gene, I'm afraid to leave the balcony.
I'll help you out.
Sounds like a terrible movie. Hold on just a minute, Gene. Here's Spot the Wonder Dog to go get some bad films because it's time for our regular feature, Dogs of the Week, where we each pick the week's worst movies.
My dog this week is a reprehensible little shocker called Don't Answer the Phone. I know we usually make a lot of jokes in this segment of the show, but Don't Answer the Phone isn't the least bit laughable. It's a cheap thriller about a crazed rapist attacking a series of women, and that's all there really is to the film. A religious crazed nut who has an inferiority complex regarding his father simply attacks one woman after another. This film practically slobbers over its rape attacks. What's it trying to do? Turn on the sickies in the audience? Don't Answer the Phone is really just part of the message of this picture. Don't see this movie is more to the point. Not a good one, Roger.
Sounds really reprehensible,
Yeah.
Gene. Mine is merely bad. My dog this week is sort of distinguished, though. It's absolutely and without any question the worst vampire movie I've ever seen. It's called Last Rites, and it's about a perverted undertaker whose specialty is snatching the bodies of people who aren't yet quite dead. And then, needless to say, he sinks his fangs into their necks. Real gruesome stuff. The relatives of one of his victims begin to suspect something when the undertaker won't return the body of the deceased. And then there are all sorts of horrible rituals and a lot of gnashing of teeth. One neat thing about most vampire movies is that the vampires play by the rules. You know, only go out at night, avoid mirrors and crosses, look out for garlic, all that stuff. But the vampires in The Last Rites are a lot simpler. They just go after everything in sight. And I say, more power to them, just as long as they don't try to do it in a sequel.
We'll avoid them both. Well, now here's Spot the Wonder Dog to put his paw print on some films that are absolutely no good. It's time for Dog of the Week, where we each pick the week's worst movies.
Well, Spot, you really found a stinkeroo for me this week. My dog is a schlock disaster movie mistitled When Time Ran Out, and time is about the only thing that doesn't run out during this turkey. It's about an exploding volcano that threatens to destroy a tourist island in the Pacific, and it was produced by Irwin Allen, the same guy who unloaded Beyond the Poseidon Adventure and The Swarm on us. They all have the same formula. A bunch of movie stars fleeing in horror from some half-baked catastrophe with time out for ham-bone romantic subplots. When Time Ran Out wastes the talents of good actors, including William Holden as a brave real estate investor who wants to evacuate the island. James Franciscus as a resort owner who says the volcano is only bluffing. Paul Newman is a courageous geologist who warns of impending doom. And Jacqueline Bisset, who's in love with at least two of the men in this movie and maybe more. Now, the climactic scene has everyone creeping across a bridge over a river of molten lava while the audience makes bets on who's going to fall in.
Well, who does fall in?
Everybody except the Academy Award nominees. Nominated for other pictures. Yeah.
My dog this week is The Fifth Floor, the story of a young go-go dancer who gets trapped in a mental institution where she's abused by other patients and by the hospital staff, sort of a kinky one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Problem with this film is that it is just a cheap shocker that uses a psychiatric hospital to tease us with that old and sick standby, the defenseless young woman in peril. Haven't we seen enough pictures like that? Bondage freaks may enjoy it when the young woman is tied up in a straitjacket. That's the level of sick thrills in The Fifth Floor, which I advise you to stay off of.
Well, a lot of bad movies get made, Gene, and here's our canine friend Spot the Wonder Dog leaping into the balcony to announce the Dog of the Week, the week's worst movies.
I think mine's pretty horrible. My dog this week is Death Ship, the idiotic tale of an old World War II Nazi torture ship that appears once again on the high seas, rams into a cruise ship carrying a bunch of dumbbells, and slowly begins to kill them off one by one. George Kennedy. It's not enough he makes those lousy airport movies. Stars as the cruise ship commander who gets himself whipped up into a neo-Nazi frenzy and begins to do the bidding of the mysterious ship. He tells Richard Crenna, his subordinate, in a typical speech, "This ship needs your blood, Trevor. Blood, blood, blood. Your wife's blood, blood, blood. Your children's blood, blood, blood." We get the point long before we have to suffer seeing a whole bunch of people hanged on meat hooks. To say the least, everyone associated with Death Ship went overboard.
Oh, it sounds like a pretty bloody bad movie, Gene.
Yes.
My dog this week is a trashy piece of soft-core sex called Night Games. It was directed by Roger Vadim, a French director who makes a specialty out of discovering and exploiting sex pod actresses. He's uncovered such stars as Brigitte Bardot, Catherine Deneuve, and Jane Fonda, And now his latest discovery is American actress Cindy Pickett. He discovered her on the CBS television soap opera, The Guiding Light, and for all I know, and I watched The Guiding Light, she might really be talented. You sure can't tell from this movie. It's a moronic and totally confused fantasy in which the sexually repressed heroine is left alone in a large mansion when her husband leaves town, and then she engages in a series of sexual fantasies that may be real or may be dreams but are definitely laughable. This sort of exploitation film, sex masquerading as instant psychoanalysis, is about 15 years out of date, and so is Night Games.
Okay, so much for the dogs. Now to recap the main movies on this show.